Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to look at industries and why understanding an industry's competitive environment is crucial for long-term business success. Why do some industries make it easy to earn profits while others seems like constant battlefields? To answer that, we will explore Porter's 5 forces framework, one of the most influential tools in strategic management. Industries and the immediate environment of firms. Every organization operates within an industry, and managers must understand the key actors within that industry. These include customers or clients, suppliers, competitors, and also non firm organizations such as universities, regulators, or regional technology bodies. These actors form the immediate environment of the firm and directly influence long term survival, how easy or difficult it is to earn profits. Industry profitability and competition. Industry profitability varies significantly. One major stream of strategy research focuses on the degree of competition within an industry. The key idea is simple. The higher the level of competition, the harder it is for firms to earn high profits. Two major determinants of profitability are the intensity of competition, the bargaining power of buyers and suppliers. And this is where Porter's 5 forces comes in. Porter's 5 forces framework analyzes the attractiveness of an industry by examining 5 competitive forces. First, the threat of new entrants. Second, the threat of substitutes. Third, the bargaining power of buyers. Fourth, the bargaining power of suppliers. Fifth, the rivalry between existing competitors. Together, these forces make up an industry's structure, which is assumed to be relatively stable over time. When competition is low, buyer and supplier's power is weak, and entry threats are limited. Firms can expect higher profits. Now let's look at each force in detail. Rivalry between existing competitors. Competitive rivals are organizations with similar product or services aimed at same customer group. They are direct competitors in the same industry or market. For example, Volkswagen and Toyota, Zara, H&M and Next, Acer and Dell. The degree of rivalry depends on competitor concentration and balance, where there are many competitors or they are of similar size or power. In such a scenario, there is a danger of intense rivalrous behavior. For example, price cuts to gain dominance. When there is low rivalry, one or two big players dominate the market. Small player avoid competition, focuses on niches. Industry growth rate. Strong growth is not so problematic as firm growth doesn't have to be at expense of other firms, but where there is a low growth firm, growth is expense of competitors. For example, strong price competition, low profits, economics of a scale and high fixed costs. When high initial investment needed, for example, in capital equipment or initial research and development, companies will seek to spread their cost by increasing volumes, for example, price cuts. High exit barriers, where closure or divestment, difficult or costly, can have intense competition to retain market share. For example, when high investment on specific assets is needed, or where there is high redundancy costs. Low differentiation, where services and products are more or less the same and the customer can switch products easily. Only way to compete is price, for example, petrol. Barriers to entry, the factors that need to be overcome by new entrants if they are to enter an industry. The lower the barrier to enter, the greater the competition and the harder it is for firms to make higher profits and vice versa. The main barriers to entry are economics of scale, experience, network effects. In some industries, the setup costs are very expensive, For example, industries where high capital investment is needed, where time to learn and experience necessary. For example, highly regulated industries or where large user network are required. For example, phone or social networks. Once incumbents have reached large-scale production, it is very difficult for new firms to match them. Access to supply and distribution channels. When control over a key supply or distribution channel is owned by one or few organizations, for example, oil, retail, rail transport, but disruption is possible. For example, Amazon disturbed retail distribution. Another barrier to entry is legislation or government restrictions, different forms of legal restraint on new entries. For example, intellectual property rights protection in pharma, rail, food regulation for safety, financial regulation, and pension selling. Deregulation can remove protection to existing firms. For example, air industry in 1990s financed with crowdsourcing. But there are expected retaliations. For example, if a firm considering entering an industry fears the retaliation of existing firms, this is quite common in developing country firms. For example, original equipment manufacturer situations. Original equipment manufacturers fear launching their own brand and losing manufacturing contracts. For example, HTC feared it would lose production contracts from US mobile phone firms if it launched its own mobile phone. The above give incumbency firms a number of cost and quality advantages. The threat of substitutes. Substitutes are products or services that offer the same or similar benefit to an industry's product or services but have a different nature. That is, they are from outside the industry. For example, high-speed trains for airlines for continental travel, charities and public services in care of old. Customers will switch to alternatives and thus the threat increases if the price or performance ratio of the substitute is superior. For example, aluminum is more expensive than steel, but it is more cost efficient for car parts. The substitute benefits from an innovation that improves customer satisfaction. For example, high-speed trains can be quicker than airlines on short-haul routes. Additionally, there are extra industry effects. Substitutes can come from outside the incumbents industry, which forces managers to look outside their own industry to consider more distant threats and constraints. The bargaining power of buyers. Buyers are the organization's immediate customers, not the final consumer of the product. For example, for Unilever shampoo, the immediate buyers are Amazon and Walmart, not the final consumer. These buyers are strategic customers with high market power. If buyers are powerful, they can demand cheap prices or product or service improvements. This reduces profits. Buyer power is likely to be high when buyers are concentrated, when very few large customers account for majority of sales. For example, large retailers such as Amazon, Walmart, etc. Buyers have low switching costs when buyer can easily switch suppliers. This is high if it is standardized and undifferentiated products. For example, vegetables, fruits, clothing, standard electronic components. Buyers can supply their own inputs, called backward vertical integration, when buyer threaten to supply the good themselves rather than buy it from supplier. The bargaining power of suppliers. Suppliers are those who supply what organizations need to produce their product or services. For example, raw materials and equipment, finance, labor. Powerful suppliers can reduce an organization's profits. Supplier power is likely to be high when there are few suppliers. When a few suppliers dominate supply chains, for example, airplane manufacturers. When suppliers provide a specialist or rare input, for example, very specialized labor or specialized knowledge under IPR, or where there are no substitutes for a supply or component, where switching costs are high, if it is disruptive, expensive to change suppliers. For example, Microsoft is a powerful supplier because it is time consuming to change operating systems. In case of suppliers, competition threat, when suppliers can integrate backward or forward. For example, low-cost airlines have cut out the use of travel agents. Pharmaceutical company can decide to make their own chemical supplies rather than buy them in market. Strategic implications of five forces. Porter's framework helps manager answer key questions like which industries should we enter or exit? Where are profits sustainable? How can we influence industry structure? Managers can build barriers to enter, create network effects, integrate vertically. The impact of the forces also varies. Large firms can handle barriers better than small firms. Limitations of five forces model. Despite its usefulness, the model has limitations, like defining the right industry boundaries is difficult. Industries are not static. Converging technologies blur boundaries, especially in digital markets. Too much focus on competition and not enough on cooperation. Managers must also consider the microenvironment, especially with emerging technologies like AI. To sum up, Porter's five forces is a powerful tool for understanding industry structure, but it works best when combined with a broader view of competition, cooperation, and technological change. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next